everyone to our first Friday of October. We're incredibly proud and excited to have Commander Billie Farrell, Commanding Officer of the USS Constitution, with us tonight. Before I introduce her, let me bring you some upcoming events and news. We're having an open house November 10th from 3 to 6 p.m. where we'll have cider, donuts, and other fall goodies. We'll have discounts in the museum store where you can purchase Life Ring at lifering.com for the Maritime Tree event. We also will be recruiting volunteers and pulling in new members. Also look for our annual appeal letter that will be going out later this month. And our next upcoming First Friday, which is November 4th, we have Christine Malpica on Indigenous people. Tomorrow she has an all-day observance over at the Waterfront Park. And that will be going on from early morning to late day. So I'm going to have Janice Drake, our museum store manager, come and tell you some of the wheels and deals she's doing.
Yeah. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
All right. I'm just going to give you an update on what's going on in the museum shop. We have some new great gifts that we utilize some of the beautiful artwork that is here in the museum and put it on trays and mugs and on wine glasses. So they're really unique, and it's something you can't get anyplace else. Also, we have some examples of the life rings. We can do some decoration on them for people. We can do something simple with just a bow and the family name, or if you want something more exotic, decorative, we can do some decoration for you. We can also sell you a kit at a nominal cost. We are also going to offer a 20% discount to members for a designated period of time in December. We'll let you know about exactly what that is, which will be, hopefully we'll have a lot of great stuff in there for you to buy your Christmas gifts for. And also, we ask that you encourage your friends to join the Custom House so that they can enjoy the 20% discount and the wonderful Friday nights, the first Friday nights that we have. And I think that the benefits of these far outweigh the cost. So, thank you. And we will be open until 8:30 tonight. Thank you. Thank you.
So to get to why we're all here, Commander Farrell is a native of, how do you pronounce that? Paducah, Kentucky. She attended the United States Naval Academy and was commissioned in 2004 with a Bachelor of Science in Political Science. She was awarded her Master of Science in Operations Management from the University of Arkansas in 2009. Commander Farrell is the U.S. Constitution's 77th Commanding Officer. Commander Farrell's awards include 3 Meritorious Service Medals, 4 Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medals, and 3 Unit Commendation Medals. The stage is all yours.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here with you all tonight. I do like to just get it out of the way. I am from Kentucky, but I did marry into the Massachusetts family. My husband is from Peabody, and one of our dogs is named Fenway, so I figured that at least gets me a level playing field. But we make up for it the fact that the other dog's name is Bourbon, which is in most states. Which is fun until our four-year-old starts screaming that she wants bourbon when she's upset. And never a dull moment. But again, thank you. It is a pleasure to be here with you all tonight. So growing up in Paducah, Kentucky, obviously a landlocked state. I did grow up on a lake there, though. And so around water quite a bit. I also was a swimmer. I started swimming competitively when I was 6, so very familiar with being around the water. In 6th grade, I actually was channel surfing, which I have to explain to kids today what that means with streaming services, but I was channel surfing and found a Naval Academy graduation on TV. I immediately stopped. I watched the entire ceremony, went and found my parents and said, I know where I'm going to school. And my dad said, sweet, I don't have to pay for college. And my mom actually said, yes, they do. I saw them on the field. And she went, oh, well, then we'll figure it out. Just because that she didn't know anyone that had ever gone to the Naval Academy and that was a thing. So the first class of women from the Naval Academy actually graduated in 1980. So this was several years later. I think it would have been 1992 when I was watching the ceremony. So, and I forgot about that until I took command of Constitution. She actually reminded me that that's what she told me. And I said, you don't tell me that. What were you thinking? She said, I just didn't know. So I spent the rest of my middle school and high school years trying to figure out how to make that dream a reality. I had to seek out mentors locally that had served in the Navy and could tell me what that was going to be like. I had to seek out people to tell me how to apply to the Naval Academy. I had to get a congressional nomination in order to go to the Naval Academy. I did not have family connections to do that. I had some family friends with some connections who put me in touch with a local congressman, and I marched with him in our local Veterans Day parade and basically told him why I deserved his nomination to go to the Naval Academy. And so I was fortunate enough that he did nominate me. Congressman Ed Whitfield gave me his nomination, and I was accepted and appointed and graduated from the class of 2004. That's where I met my husband from Peabody. He graduated 2 years ahead of me, but we started dating as midshipmen. Our first date was actually the weekend prior to 9/11. So I give that to you really as just a reference in time more than anything else. But it also kind of set up the rest of our careers in the Navy and how our lives would unfold. And so he and I have been married since 2009, and we have 2 kids. We have a 7-year-old son, and our daughter's going to be 4 here in a couple weeks. And then my husband actually just retired from the Navy earlier this year on board Constitution. So that's a little bit about me. So for my bio, Navy bios are written in a very specific way that is not necessarily English. And so I usually like to kind of break down my career and explain how I got to Constitution, because it's obviously been 18 years. So when I was commissioned from the Naval Academy, I was commissioned as what they call a surface warfare officer. So in plain terms, that means my job in the Navy is to fight and drive ships and to lead sailors. And so that's what I've done for the past 18 years.
Can you repeat what you just said?
Fight and drive ships and to lead sailors. Yep, those are my three things that I do. And so my first ship was USS Bella Gulf, a Ticonderoga class guided missile cruiser. Say that 3 times fast. In Norfolk, Virginia, I reported as the electrical officer, and if you remember, I was a political science major. So my first job was as an engineering officer on a ship. And so there was a little bit of a learning curve there, but I had great mentors that took me under their wing, showed me the way, great senior enlisted that taught me the job and what I needed to do. I really enjoyed the ship. I liked the schedule. I really liked the captain I had at that point, and so I actually extended on the ship for what would be my second job in the Navy, and at that point I took over as the navigator. And so part of how the Navy grows you as a junior officer in the surface warfare community, or the SWO community is what we call it, is the acronym, is they want you to have a broad experience across the board. So if you do take command of a ship, you have enough knowledge across all the different departments and capabilities of a ship that you can accurately and effectively lead that crew. And so from there I finished up, did 2 deployments there on that ship, and then went to my first shore duty. And so from there I went to Memphis, Tennessee, so back to being landlocked in the Navy, and worked at the personnel command there for a few years before I went back to another ship, another Ticonderoga class guided missile cruiser, USS San Jacinto, where I took on the role as weapons officer for about 18 months, and then fleeted up to my next job, which was as the combat systems officer. And really the difference there, the weapons officer job is really the anti-submarine warfare, the heavy guns, anything that goes boom on the ship, technical term, boom. The combat systems officer is responsible for all things Aegis, so if you've ever heard of the Aegis weapon system, the Aegis radar system. And the missiles, they go whoosh. So the combat systems officer are the whooshes, whooshes. And so did that for another 18 months or so, deployed twice on that ship as well, once for 9 months. So all my deployments have been out in Norfolk, Virginia, so all the deployments I've done have been to the Mediterranean, the Baltic, the Red Sea, the Arabian Gulf primarily. I've been fortunate enough to visit about 18 countries during that time for port visits, and the really great thing about doing that is you really get to see the local culture, because a lot of times the other local Navy will link up with you, take you around, show you what they want you to see for their country, take you to some of the off the beaten path places, and so it was a really wonderful thing to be able to see that side of the world.
So, quickly, how many sailors are under your command on a ship like that?
On the ship right now, 80. I have 80 active duty sailors.
Yeah, but I to the Ticonderoga.
360. 360. And so when I left my combat systems officer job, I went back to the Naval Academy. I taught for a few years. I taught seamanship and navigation, and the SWOs, who were headed out to their first ships to teach them how to be officers. And then I went to Surface Force Atlantic, and that is the admiral responsible for manning, training, and equipping all ships in Norfolk, Virginia, Rota, Spain, Bahrain, and Mayport, Florida. So I did that, all those ports, and I was the deputy operations officer there. So I did all the scheduling and hurricane avoidance. Actually, in hurricane season was the other thing I did while I was there. At that point, I went back to another ship. I was the executive officer, so second in command of another Ticonderoga-class guided missile cruiser, USS Vicksburg. And then from there, I found out I was selected to command a ship. And so the way it works in the Navy, we have qualification boards that meet and select the most qualified candidates for milestone positions and promotion. They work separately, but both things. And so I was selected for the milestone of commanding my own ship. And when the time came to figure out which ship that was going to be, there was one name on that list that stood out, and that was USS Constitution. So from there, I then applied for the position of Constitution because it is a special duty assignment with the Navy. So everyone that comes to the ship is interviewed. So again, I have 80 active duty sailors who maintain the ship. Our mission is to preserve, promote, and protect the legacy of the ship. We work hand in hand with the local civilian contracting government maintenance team. They do all the heavy lifting. So if you've ever been to the ship when it's in dry dock or any major renovations, there's a team permanently assigned that actually works on the maintenance of the ship. And we do that hand in hand as a partnership. And so I found out I was selected to come take command of Constitution, and it really was just an unbelievable outpouring of support from across the country. And the thing about it too, there's a picture of me floating around standing next to the ship in 1998 when I was a teenager, when my parents brought me to Boston for a family vacation. We walked the entire Freedom Trail. We stood next to the ship. In that picture, I'm wearing my Naval Academy hat. And so as much outpouring of support and everything that I've had, the thing it's also let me really reflect on is, 1998 to 2022, today we have 35 women in command ships across the Navy. And so I really just get to represent them when I go out and talk to groups like this, because so much of what the Navy and the Department of Defense does in general is go over the horizon to do the mission, and sometimes I think we even forget that not everybody sees it. And so I'm here to tell you it's out there, it's happening. And so yeah, it's kind of that. So the ship. Part of the reason I wanted to command the ship, so the oath that we in the military take is to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. And I couldn't think of a better place to hold that oath than on the decks of USS Constitution, named for that document. So after the Revolutionary War, we actually disestablished the Navy. We said we don't need to worry about it, everybody's way over there. We're going to be fine on this side of the ocean. Let's just sell off those ships. They're expensive, a lot of maintenance, get rid of them. And so lo and behold, once we started to grow though and started to show our presence around the world, as every other country was doing, we started sending merchants across the Atlantic Ocean. And they actually started to get taken captive by the Barbary Corsairs, pirates on the northern coast of Africa. And so between that and also the British were then impressing Americans into their service. So they would take Americans off their ships, say, congratulations, you're now employed by His Majesty the King, you're coming with us. And we said, hang on a second. I know we're a new country, but you're going to take us seriously. And so in 1794, George Washington and Congress passed the Naval Armament Act that authorized the building of 6 frigates. The Constitution was the 3rd one of those frigates built. So she is one of the 6 original frigates of the modern Navy that we have today. So really coming full circle. And so if you do the math, her actual commissioning date is October 21st. So 2 weeks from today, the ship turns 225 years old. Wow. So yeah, so she went on then to have a great career, obviously undefeated in battle with a record of 33-0 is her record. And when the wars first started, she fought in the Barbary Wars, Croisy War with France. The War of 1812 is really where she earned her notoriety though. When we declared war on Great Britain for the War of 1812, the Americans were actually ordered not to engage the British because they were so much more experienced than us in a maritime and naval sense. And so the Americans were ordered to meet up in squadrons. And so Captain Isaac Hull, the CO of Constitution, was looking for a squadron to meet up with. And he found one, except it wasn't American. It was British. And so at that point, he made a decision to tactically retreat. That was what he was going to do to fight another day. Except at that moment, the wind died completely. So he's not going anywhere. The upside, they're not going anywhere either. And so at that point, he ordered the crew to offload any excess weight of the ship to lighten it. He also ordered them to wet the sails so they could catch any wind that was passing through the area, but to no avail, nothing was working. And so at that point, he ordered the crew to start to kedge the ship. And so what that meant is they took one of their anchors, they lowered it down to one of the small boats. That small boat would then row out in front of Constitution, drop the anchor into the water, and they would use the ship's capstan to then pull Constitution to the anchor. 2,200 tons was Constitution's weight in 1812. They did that for 67 hours, almost 3 days, gaining a slight advantage from the British. The British saw this was working, they tried it as well, also getting it to work, but not as effectively. So once a squall line passed through, Captain Isaac Hull was able to set the sails and return safely to Port Boston to resupply, and this time he did not wait for new orders, so that event had been called the Great Chase at that point. He did not wait for new orders, and this time he went out on the hunt. He was angry. He said, I'm gonna go find the British. And so he went up off the coast of Nova Scotia, where he found a British ship, and it was HMS Guerriere, who had been one of the ships he had gotten away from during the Great Chase. Both ships were ready for a fight, and so HMS Guerriere actually started to open fire on Constitution. Initially missing, but then the cannonballs did start to strike the hull of Constitution. Captain Isaac Hull told the men not to fire because he wanted to close the distance to the ship until they actually opened fire. And so Guerriere kept shooting and firing at Constitution, at which point a sailor saw a cannonball bounce off the side of the ship. Wow. And he looked at the captain and said, "Huzzah! Her sides are made of iron." The battle continued. They closed the distance. Constitution finally opened fire at 40 to 50 yards away from the other ship. They did a rolling broadside, so firing all the guns down one side of the ship forward to aft, one at a time. And when the smoke cleared, it was already the beginning of the end of the battle, and the mizzen mast on Guerriere had already fallen. At that point, Constitution, Guerriere was too far gone at that point to capture, which was actually the objective of ships back in that day, was to capture them, because it was much easier to do that than to build them. But Guerriere was too far gone, so they returned to Port Boston, destroyed Guerriere, returned victorious and heroes, really the first major naval victory against Great Britain, and the nickname and legend of Old Ironsides was born from that. That's where the nickname comes from. She went on to have a long career.
Captain Farrell, if I may add,
Yeah.
because I think it's kind of key, and might be a surprise to you. Captain William Nichols from Newburyport was the captain that told the Constitution where the Guerriere was. He was on the Decatur at that time.
And so Constitution then went on to serve, her last capture was in 1853, which was a slaving ship that was coming across, captured and sent back. And from there, she actually was repurposed into a training ship at the Naval Academy. During the Civil War, when they thought the campus was going to get overrun, they actually embarked the entire student body and staff onto the ship, sailed up to Newport, Rhode Island for safety, where they reestablished the Naval Academy until the Civil War was over, and then took everyone back to Maryland. And the other thing I always find really amazing in the ship's history is the American people have saved her twice. Once, it was a little bit of a false rumor going around at one point that the Navy was actually going to get rid of the ship. And Oliver Wendell Holmes heard this story, which was what inspired him to pen his famous poem of Old Ironsides. So that was the first time. So the country rallied and said, "You're not taking our ship. She's wonderful. We love what she stands for."
Is she the only one of the original 6 frigates that's still?
She is. She's the only one that's still with us. A couple of them were captured and scuttled, or repurposed by other countries and eventually scuttled. A couple that were still with us were scuttled. USS Constellation in Baltimore is the second of her name, but used some of the original materials from the first Constellation. But otherwise, Constitution is the one that is left with us today. And so the other time the ship was going to be done away with, the Navy again said, "Thanks, Constitution, for your service. We're going to use it for torpedo practice." And the American people said, "No, you're not." Exactly, gas. That's exactly right. And school children from around the country actually donated their change. It became known as the Pennies Campaign. They raised $154,000 towards the restoration of Constitution. So the current configuration, if you come to the ship, is that result of that restoration. The guns on board the ship today are a result of that restoration. So Constitution, if you visit, is a 3-masted, 44-gun frigate. That's how many guns she carries into battle. 32-pound carronades and 24-pound long guns are the two primary size guns on the ship. And it would have taken a crew of 450 to 500 men to operate the ship. So the biggest question I usually get is, does the ship still sail? No. The ship still goes out. The ship still leaves the pier 7 times a year. And so really the ship is still seaworthy, which is why she's still in the water at Charlestown Navy Yard. The biggest issue really is the manpower. And so 450 to 500 men versus the 80 sailors of today, it's just not the same thing. But the sailors still climb. My sailors today still climb. Every Tuesday and Thursday they go up the mast. They drop the sails. We have 3 sails on the ship right now, not the 45 to 48 they would have had back in the day, but we do have 3. And so when we go out for our voyages, we do drop those. We're gone for about 4 hours, and we use them as a variety of commemorations across the ship's history or just American history. So we've done five of them so far this year. May was a crew training evolution because it was my first time taking the ship out, and I wanted everyone to be focused. June 17th, we took about 150 Vietnam veterans and their families out to thank them for their service. July 4th, I think, is the one everybody knows about. That's the public lottery. We opened that up. This year we received about 11,000 entries for 150 spots on the ship, and we had people that flew in from Seattle and everything that won those spots to come with us. August 12th was a friends and family for the crew on board the ship, and then we just finished up our 2 Chief Heritage Weeks. So the newest Chief Petty Officers in the Navy, the newest senior enlisted sailors, once they're selected, on top of that, a group of them actually come to the ship. They sleep on board for a week. They do all the training with my team, and then we get the ship out on the Fridays that they're there. We do 2 of those. Unfortunately, 2 weeks ago we had to cancel because it was very high wind. And so I told them instead of going out to sea that day, they got an important leadership lesson on making a hard decision. Because I also wanted to go. And the one I'm really excited about, the last one for this year, will be 2 weeks from today on the ship's 225th birthday. And so we have about 120 prior crew members coming back, all the way back to the 70s. And we're all going to take the ship out into the harbor. We go out to Castle Island, we do a 21-gun salute with 2 of the 24-pound long guns. And then we'll turn around, come back in, we'll pause at the Coast Guard base in Boston, because that used to be Edmund Hart Shipyard, which is where Constitution was actually constructed. And so we'll do a 17-gun salute there to pay honor to that fact. And then as we pull in, if you've been to Charlestown Navy Yard, there is a great hull ship there, USS Cass and Young, a Fletcher-class World War II destroyer, survived 2 kamikaze hits. We'll pause there and read a poem called Old Glory and pay tribute to our fallen shipmates over the years. And then we'll return to port. So we're gone for about 4 hours. So do not sail, we take a tug with us, but in the spirit of the ship, it is still there and very much alive. 2012 was the last time the ship sailed completely on her own for the bicentennial of the War of 1812. And so I just asked the Navy if there's any interest in doing that again in the future, so we'll see what they say. For the birthday year, we are really pushing, and kind of that's going to be most of my time in command. So I have the ship for 2.5 years, is how long I'm going to be the captain on board. I came originally on 2-year orders, but I took command of the ship in January, which is an outside ceremony, and nobody wants to be outside in Boston in January. It was cold. And then I also just told you the first time I took the ship out was in May, so it was 5 months later, so it would have been nice to have seen that ahead of time, so I just asked the Navy for 6 extra months, which they just approved, and so I'll be captain of the ship till around June of 24, and then turn it over. But this year will really be defined by the 225th birthday of the ship. And we're looking to celebrate that for an entire year. And so part of that is trying to push to the middle of the country, like Kentucky, so that they see the ship and understand it. And I also, it's been really fun because I've gotten letters from all across the country once I took command of the ship with kind of random tidbits of people and their connection to the ship. And it led me to believe that I think most states probably have some connection to this ship. For example, a school in Topeka, Kansas wrote me a letter and said their flagpole was actually made out of wood that was removed during one of the restorations. And so we're going to celebrate that, and every birthday for every state, kind of happy birthday from us to you, with the tie into Constitution, to hopefully push that message to the middle of the country. And then we're also trying to get the younger generation interested in the ship. And so we're going to do that in a variety of things with some historical reference. So the poetry contest is a nod to Oliver Wendell Holmes and his famous poem of Old Ironsides, an art contest, an essay contest, and then kind of continuing to write the ship's history since it is 2022 and we still are an active commissioned ship, digital content and social media as well. And all the winners from those contests in the next generation We're going to have another underway next year on the ship's birthday that's kind of the next 225, and getting them really excited about continuing this legacy and what it actually represents. I'll open it up for questions because I feel like I've been pontificating enough. Yes, sir.
Okay. Forgive me on this question, but many decades ago when I was in the military, in fact, I just realized before you were in the Navy, we used to occasionally have dinner with two of your predecessors, Sudholtz and Brown. And during the dinner, inevitably, one conversation came up over and over again. Ghosts on the Constitution. Have you had that in your tenure?
Not. We had that question quite a bit on the ship. I have not slept on the ship yet. I've been looking for a good reason. I think actually 2 weeks on the ship's birthday, that night, I'm going to sleep on board to tie it to just a good reason. And so I've never seen that or anything like that. I do tell people, though, the ship is a battleground. You know, the ship, sailors died on the decks of their ship, giving their lives for the freedoms that we have today. And so I really just usually reflect on that and what it represents to be there, especially when the ship is quiet and there's no one touring it, just to kind of sit in the captain's cabin and look at the name of some of the previous commanders, Dewey, Bainbridge, Porter, Hull, and to think that they sat in that same space that I'm privileged enough to sit in. So I'll let you know if I do.
Is or was there any such system like the prize system if an American vessel captured even the wreck of a British or any pirates or any of those? Did they have the prize system like the British Navy had?
They would recover what they could from any wreckage. If the ship was too far gone, they would scuttle it or get rid of it because they didn't want someone else to take it and repair it to make it, seaworthy again. The crew, if anybody survived, they often would bring them on board the ship and kind of either give them two choices, which was join our side of the fight, or they would drop them off in port when they pulled in somewhere else. And so it was a prize system. I mean, a lot of it came down to supplies because you're really, a lot of times people, when we talk about Constitution, they want to know how long she could stay out to sea. It was limited by the supplies she could take on, as any ship was in that day. Today in the Navy, we're one of the few countries that has the ability to underway replenish. So we actually pull up to another ship that basically serves as our gas station, and they have our supplies, and we actually will drive alongside each other at about 180 feet and connect and pass gas and pass mail and pass food and all the things over. So when COVID hit, our ships actually were able to stay out to sea for over 200 days without ever pulling into port because of that capability.
When you say that, the ship shoots its guns, are we talking about little cannons on board?
So
how does that happen?
So 2 of the 24-pound long guns on board the ship, which are on the gun deck, so the lower level, so they're still 6,600 pounds each. 2 of those, when Queen Elizabeth came to visit in 1976, Commander Ty Martin, if you've ever read the book Most Fortunate Ship, actually had 2 of those guns converted to saluting batteries, basically. So they look like guns, but the inside workings are modern, and so those are what we fired. So we still fire twice a day, every morning at 8 a.m. when we play the national anthem and raise the flag, and every evening at sunset when we lower the flag. And then on occasional things where we take the ship out, or we've got the Navy's birthday next week, we'll do a 21-gun salute in Charlestown pier side for that, which inevitably will scare some poor small child. And I will hear screaming over the cannons. So, yes.
I have a piece of wood from the ship, which I got years ago as a membership perk, and I value it very highly, but it makes me wonder every time I see it, and you're the perfect person to ask, what are the biggest preservation challenges for the ship these days? I mean, it's very old. A lot of us live in old houses. We know what's involved in maintaining an old house. This thing sits in the water, which makes it difficult times 10. What are the biggest preservation challenges you face?
So it's exactly that. It's the daily maintenance and wear and tear even. So in the summer, we were getting about 5,000 visitors a day to the ship. So I'd say on average, we get 600,000 to 700,000 people a year that come tour the ship. So we're also fighting that wear and tear of the constant. We have the benefit of modern materials that they did not have back in 1797. So that's definitely part of it. But the other really great thing is the hull of Constitution. If you went in 2015 to 2017, the ship was actually in dry dock next to the museum there. The hull of the ship is actually sheathed in copper. And that was to prevent the woodworms from burrowing in, and also to help prevent some of that natural wear and tear that happens on the hull in the water. And Paul Revere is actually the person that did the coppersmithing on the ship. The guy was everywhere in Boston. So there's definitely that, but some of the ship is still original. So about 10 to 15% of the ship, mostly the keel of the ship, is actually still original.
Are any of the guns original for the ship?
The guns are not original, so they actually would have been pulled off when the ship was doing all the variety of things that it did in its history. On top of that, when Constitution was getting repaired from a battle, they probably would have pulled the guns off to put them on another ship, and so it was always kind of a moving target in that sense. The guns that are on board today were actually made for the ship in the 1920 refit and restoration, so they all look the same, but very representative of what the guns would have been on the ship.
And one of the things, since we're talking about the guns, can you describe the difference in naval history between a carronade and a long gun?
So for Constitution, the carronades shoot 32-pound cannonballs and a shorter range. So bigger cannonball, shorter range. The 24-pound long guns, 24-pound cannonball, effective, range 1,200 yards, effective 400 to 500. The carronade was 200 to 300 shorter. And so that really was the biggest difference, was the size of the shot and the distance.
So you would use the carronades when you got in close because of the heavier ball, and they would do more damage.
Correct, and the cannonballs, this is one of those like faux pas in Hollywood, the cannonballs of that day did not explode upon impact. What they actually did is cause splintering inward, so the gun crews that were on the inside of that ship would catch all the shrapnel and splintering that would then injure them and damage whatever was around them. Which was actually the purpose. So absolutely right, the bigger the cannonball, the more splintering that would occur on the crews. And one of the things that made Constitution's hull so strong was the combination of live oak and white oak that they used in the hull. The trees originally came from Georgia when they went to harvest those. Very heavy, very dense wood native to America. So when they were designing, Joshua Humphreys, the architect, said, let's use great American materials that we have here, they don't have in Europe, and let's make this ship strong. The other thing he did is actually the diagonal riders of the ship, so part of the rib system off the keel, he put those closer together, which also helped to reinforce it. So when cannonballs bounced off the side of the ship or got lodged in the side of the ship, that's really why. The Navy today grows the trees we need to actually repair the ship at a base in Indiana.
What was the last active battle that the Constitution was in?
So 1853 was the last capture, which was H.M. Gambrill, a slave ship that was coming across from Africa.
There's been so much hurricanes in the news and the increasing power of them. How would the ship be protected if Boston were to have a hurricane projected to hit?
So we do have foul weather lines and chains to secure the ship. If there looked like there would be something else coming, there's all kinds of contingency plans on what we would do with the ship to move her to safety. So again, as the ex-hurricane coordinator for the rest of the fleet in Virginia, something that's always on my mind, and I always watch the forecast.
Did they move your husband with you?
Yes, he is at children's soccer games this evening. So he's covering down there. But he did. He moved up here. At the point when we found out I was accepted for the position, he actually also was selected for command. He was not a surface warfare officer like me. He started that way and then actually transferred over to the information professional community. So he did computers and networking for the Navy. And so once we found out we were moving up here, we wanted to do this as a family. And so he submitted his retirement request and came up with me.
Did you meet much resistance when you took your first command as the first woman commander?
No, the country, and actually, and I always say this, I was actually a little shocked at the country and how overwhelming that positive support was. And I think part of it, again, is, 1998 to me is the first time a woman took command of ship. And I never served with a woman captain. I knew they existed. I just had never worked for one before. But I think it also is a great tribute to the ship and what she means to the country, and that it was something that people could just look at and be happy with and celebrate something. Which is why I talk about the fact that we have 35 women in command ships today.
I was more curious about the crew than the country.
Oh no, the crew's been fabulous. The crew, so 80 sailors, about a third of my crew is women.
Yes. Do you live in the commander's home?
I wish, I tried.
I've been there.
When I was selected, and I emailed Commander Benda, who was the 76th captain, and hey, I'm going to be your relief. Where do you live? It's a very nice house, and he was like, no. I tried, I did try. But now, maybe one day, maybe 78 can get the house back.
Do you think as a female commander, you are brought up, does the Navy bring you along with special emphasis on what you have to do and how you do it as a woman and sort of maintain that commander stuff?
Yeah, so for me, I think, and I've had a lot of time to reflect on this in this job because I've gotten asked that kind of a question a lot more than I ever have in my past. And again, with the Navy, every ship is very different. Every captain sets the tone for that command and what happens there from the top down. And so I was very blessed that even though I only worked for men along the way, they had an environment where everyone was to be treated with dignity and respect. And they embodied that and showed that every day. And they actually are some of the people that pushed me and said, you need to be a captain of a ship one day. And sometimes I believe saw something in me that I didn't even see in myself. And so a lot of times when I talk to the kids and I go to schools and talk to them, I share that with them. And I also tell them, we talk about diversity at a lower level, but I also encourage them to diversify up, diversify your mentors and the people you have in your life. Because the more experience you have across the board, I have multiple mentors I call for different things on a regular basis. Sometimes it's the same situation and I want two opinions. Sometimes it's I have a situation and I know one of my commanders in the past had something very similar and I want to talk to them about it. But just getting that breadth of knowledge, it's one of my favorite things about the Navy is we come from every background in this country.
What will you do next?
I have no idea. About a year from now is when I'll start talking to the Navy about what's next for me. Out of this job, there's not really a standard post-Constitution career path. So my predecessor, so the other thing that's very interesting with Constitution, the former commanding officers, the FOCOs is what they call us for short. Everybody goes by their number, so I'm 77. So 76 currently teaches at the Navy Leadership and Ethics School in Newport, Rhode Island. And so there are 19 previous commanders that are still alive today, all the way back to the 60s actually. And so they are my network. So when something goes wrong on the ship or if I need some advice, that's now my support network. Because if I was in Norfolk on a destroyer, I could walk across the pier and find my friend and say, I've got an issue, I need help with a repair, what do you have that can help me? I don't have that here. And so they're really that network that helps me get through it. So, but a year from now, we'll see what the Navy says. I don't know how you get better than this though.
You're so young. How do you fit in the age of commanders?
Pretty, I would say average. So I just turned 40. Owning that one. When I graduated high school, I was 17. So I'm a little younger in that sense. When I went to the Naval Academy, I was 17. So I'm a little younger from that perspective. But as far as my peers and my year group, we're all about the same.
If there was an active war, would you be called away in the Constitution?
Potentially. So part of coming to Constitution was I had to be qualified to command any ship in the Navy. And so that is a very real possibility that if something were to happen, they could pull me from here and send me back to a modern ship.
So you could command an aircraft carrier?
That you have to be a captain for and an aviator, actually. So I'm a surface warfare officer. Aviators actually are the captains of aircraft carriers, which makes sense when you think about it because aircraft carriers are actually floating airports. And so nobody understands that better than a pilot. So a pilot at some point in their career will actually have a split path. They either are selected for kind of command of a carrier air wing, all the aircraft on an aircraft carrier, or they're selected for command of an aircraft carrier itself, and then they actually have to go back to nuke power school as a pilot. So.
How about the length of service of your crew? What's the average length of service, and do they get rotated up the same way you do?
Sure. So 80 sailors, about half of them are straight from boot camp for their first assignment in the Navy. So we actually go to Great Lakes and interview them. We interview about 110 candidates for 8 positions once a quarter on a volunteer basis, and then we select them. We ask them if they're afraid of heights, because they got to climb. and then really just see how they talk and interact, since they do have to give tours and do a lot of other things around the greater Boston area. If they come to us straight from boot camp, they're at the ship, they're assigned there for 2 years. If they are fleet returnees, meaning they've been in the Navy between probably 5 and 20 years, they'll be there on 3-year orders.
They don't sleep on board though.
Someone's always on the ship, but they don't sleep on the ship the same way sailors used to.
Do you have interactions with, say, the Merchant Marines, the Coast Guard, or these sort of snubbing guns turning around?
No, the Coast Guard, especially in Boston, directly across from us, we have a great relationship because they do a lot of the partnering that we need when we take the ship out. They help us with that. And we see each other at several, events across the city when we go. The Marines actually have a very special place in Constitution's history. And so 450 to 500 crew, 50 of those would have been Marines. So their job on the ship was to help maintain good order and discipline for the captain, and also they were snipers. They would go to the fighting tops and they would provide sniper fire down to the other ships. And so they would do that. The first Marine actually killed in combat afloat was Lieutenant Bush in the battle with Guerriere. He was requesting permission from Captain Hull to board Guerriere when he was struck down by sniper fire from the other ship. So yeah, so we actually have a very tight-knit relationship with the Marine Corps. And we have a 1812 Marine Guard or ceremonial guard that comes with us on our underways. So several of them were Marines at one point in time, and they do it on a volunteer basis now, and they cover a lot of events throughout the greater Boston area.
It seems to me that since the Constitution is a museum and doesn't go out often, that the trainees who come are not getting the kind of experience that they would on an operating ship.
Sure, and so that's
And
where
how
it's...
is that balanced?
That's where it's on me as the captain to make sure they do have that. And so one of the things we do is make sure our training program incorporates not just the history of the ship, but also the modern Navy as well. And what that means to them to go out to the ship, and the same thing, that all their requirements to be a sailor in 2022 are fulfilled. And so a lot of that boils down to the training. But the other thing I talked to them about in kind of the heritage sense, one of the reasons Constitution was so effective was how fast she could get rounds out the end of her guns. Captains ran gun drills on the ship until the crews were proficient. And the guns are front loaded, so it takes me about 2 minutes to explain the process. They could actually do it in 90 seconds. And so based on that, and that effectiveness and being faster than our adversaries, we still run gun drills on ships today. It's just now with computers and simulated missiles as opposed to a front-loaded cannon where we fire a gun. And so I talk to them about that a lot and then make sure their training is reflective of the fleet of today and what the Navy does today. But I also, talk to them, the other question I get a lot is why is Constitution still relevant and kind of the Navy in general. Constitution was built for freedom of the seas, open shipping lanes, freedom of navigation, and anti-piracy. Those are all still missions the Navy does in 2022. Freak kids out when I say that. They're like, you've seen pirates? Yes. They don't look like, usually if I'm in my 1812 uniform especially, they're like, do they look like you? No, they don't look like me.
You were also chasing slave ships, right?
Constitution was correct.
You don't do that anymore.
If the mission came up, we would, if directed.
You mentioned a 17-gun salute versus 21 guns. What are the significance of those?
21 is the highest honor that you can do, so we just really do that as a tribute to the ship's history in general, and then 17 just as a moment of kind of reflection and honor and differentiating the two instead of two 21-gun salutes.
What did we give to the Queen?
When she came to visit?
What kind of a salute?
She got a 21-gun salute.
She did.
She got a 21-gun salute, and sailors actually all in the shrouds yelling and cheering for her. And so actually if you ever visit the ship, the cannons that we talked about that were made for the ship in the 1920s actually have a historical inaccuracy on them based on the references at the time when we were figuring out really what the guns would have looked like. And so we erroneously assumed that the guns would have been made in Great Britain and then captured or stolen or anything else and put onto our ships, which is not the case. The guns were actually made in the United States. But the guns that were on the ship, based on what we knew at the time, actually have King George III's crest on top. So when the Queen was here in 1976, she actually, I think, looked to Prince Philip and said, we really need to talk to the defense minister about selling weapons to the enemy. So, all right, well, thank you so much. It's been an honor.
So we're giving her a beautiful cheese board and coaster set. This is a U.S. revenue cutter that was in the water from 1855 to, I believe it was 1883. Started out as a revenue cutter, then ended up being in the Civil War, and fired the first shot at Sumter.
Wow. Thank you so much. And come visit the ship if you haven't. Or if you have, come back.